Rose of Dawn. If we look at their videos here, and the one we're specifically going to look at here is femboys versus trans activists, we see a lot of similarities, a lot of anti-trans stuff. And she has a particular attachment to, I assume it's a she by the avatar and the banner and everything here. If they have different pronouns, they should have them in the about page. So what we're going to look at here is femboys versus trans activists to start off with. This is an interesting title because this person seems, traps are an inconvenient truth for trans activists. For those who don't know, a trap is someone who presents in most ways as a female, but still has the penis. It's generally considered a slur.
I'm sure a lot of you have heard of the transgender umbrella. For those who haven't, I am sorry, I'm going to have to introduce this to you. It's effectively a concept that encompasses any individual who crosses over or challenges their society's traditional gender roles or expressions.
Okay, I've never heard of the transgender umbrella. I know that transgender, by definition, contains a large number of a very large spectrum of gender identities. Obviously, transgender just literally means identify as a gender other than the one you were assigned at birth. Since pretty much everyone, in America at least, in most places in the world, is assigned either male or female, anyone who identifies as something else would necessarily be a transgender. I know there are some people, some non-binary, some people who aren't explicitly part of the binary gender model of male and female, don't like identifying as trans or queer. They just kind of are who they are. So this is where it does get into a little bit of sort of applying a label to someone who may not want it. But definitionally speaking, as far as I understand gender theory, all people who identify as something other than male that were assigned male at birth are definitionally transgender. And so gender issues, transgender issues can affect them. One of the reasons why many non-binaries, I think, don't like to identify as trans or queer, unless they're also not heterosexual, is because while it can help them get help and support, identifying as a trans or a queer person brings along some baggage and some potential ostracization. What this looks like to me, and obviously we're just 23 seconds in, is that since transgender is such a broad spectrum of gender, there's a lot of things that fall, there is a transgender umbrella. And what they're doing here is trying to point to the transgender umbrella as something that the trans activists are trying to use to control other people instead of just trying to build the broadest base and collectivize as much as possible for strength. They're turning a strength into a weakness, a popular tactic of reactionaries and fascists. Not just them, but they like to use it.
Previously, this only really referred to transsexual people, that is, those with gender dysphoria, but the trans activists have been fighting a quite successful war at getting that pesky diagnosis removed, enabling anyone to say that they are trans, including masculine women, feminine men, two-spirit, third gender, gender queer, drag queens and kings, cross-dressers, transvestites, you name it.
Drag is not generally considered part of the trans community as far as I understand. It's generally, like I've said before, kind of considered by some people to be an entry point. Again, Contra started as a cross-dresser, a drag queen, and now is, a woman. So, and I've read and heard other people not as famous as Contra, who started off, oh yeah, I love doing the Rocky Horror because I can dress up as a woman and it's great fun. And, a few years later they're on hormones and their name is Tiffany or whatever. And that's great, but drag kings and queens don't need to fight for the same kind of rights as actual trans people because they're not trying to change their identity. They're wearing a costume. That's not to denigrate drag, but it's just a costume. It's not changing your identity. And when you conflate drag and actual trans people, it creates this idea that actual trans people are also just putting on a costume. So it's very dangerous rhetoric, but not unexpected from a turf like this.
They fall under the umbrella now. And it is quite interesting because the whole idea behind this umbrella is to respect everyone's gender identity. That whatever you say you are, everyone has to accept.
Again, the trans umbrella, such as it is simply to give an identity, a community, so that these disparate gender identities can work together towards the common goal of advocacy for themselves and each other. This isn't about specifically identifying a group. This isn't specifically trying to overwrite people's identities. This is specifically about trying to create a strong group for advocacy. This is why Christianity has such a stranglehold on society, and particularly the Republican Party. If you went back 50, 60 years in America and asked someone what faith they were, they wouldn't say Christian. They'd say, oh, I'm First Lutheran. I'm Anabaptist. I'm whatever. First Methodist. But then people started realizing in the 60s and 70s, and Barry Goldwater was a big part of this with the Republican Party, that if you unite everyone under the label of Christian, we're all Christians, right? Then you create a base where you can appeal to Baptists in Alabama and Louisiana, Lutherans in Maine and Connecticut, Catholics every fucking where, and appeal to the Unitarians in Washington State. The only ones who kind of even get left out a little bit are Mormons, and they've always been kind of a weird duck, but even then, a lot of the goals mesh. So this, I hope, highlights why collectivizing and working together are important tools so that we are more united by our commonalities than we are divided by our differences. This is true along class lines, along race lines, and it has been proven time again that when you put aside minor differences to achieve similar common goals, you can achieve a lot. We saw this with the gay and lesbian activists. We're seeing it now with trans. And it's obviously working because the people who disagree with the trans agenda are trying to turn it into a weakness. They're trying to turn it around on the trans advocates. Don't let it. We're stronger together than separate.
It without question that this is how that you get non-binary people, for example, who don't do any kind of transition, but people will flip out at you if you refer to them as anything but a they, them. Now, some groups in this...
Sam Smith is an excellent example of someone who is a high-profile, successful person who advocates for his pronoun. And I've actually heard some decent arguments that even in cis-normative spaces like the pub, people should introduce themselves, even if everyone there is cisgender, with their pronouns. You normalize introducing people with your pronouns. You create a situation where people don't feel weird when they have non-standard or non-obvious pronouns, like Sam Smith. I've seen people who I know in their bones are trans activists and allies refer to Sam Smith as he, him, because he looks like we consider a dude to look. That is why we need to normalize disconnecting pronouns from visuals. This person right here could identify as he, him. I don't know them beyond this video. This is the first I've ever watched them. I skimmed through their channel before I went live for a little bit to kind of familiarize myself with the videos and shit like that. But this person could be he, him. I mean, I'm fairly certain they're not. Both because very rarely do trans people espouse this kind of rhetoric, although there are obvious exceptions. But also because people who are he, him probably wouldn't have this on their profile. Just saying.
umbrella don't really sound that they belong there. A good example is masculine women. Are you really going to tell a group of butch lesbians that they're actually not women? I don't think that's really going to go down very well. There's one particular group, however, that I'm
He, him lesbians are valid and have been for decades. So, yeah. And no one is trying to tell butch lesbians that they're men unless they want to identify that way. The whole point of the trans umbrella, again, it's not to push identities onto people, it's to bring people with commonalities together to better advocate for their rights.
I've been wanting to talk about for a while. I finally get the chance to, and it's funny the way in which they wind up the trans activists, and that is traps. Yes, I finally get to talk about traps in a legitimate video for my channel. So what's a trap? Well, a trap is effectively a guy who wants to look as feminine as possible, but is still very happy with being a guy. In fact, they like the idea that they are a guy who looks like a girl. A lot of this normally comes from anime. There's some quite famous anime characters. I'm not the biggest weeb in the world, so I can't really name all of them, but if you know a lot about anime, you've probably come across quite a few of them in your time. Now, they would quite easily fit under this trans umbrella, shouldn't they? I mean,
Traps are not necessarily men who dress feminine. Every time I've seen the context of a trap, so the original context of trap was on 4chan, there would be a link to a picture of someone who you scroll down and the head would be feminine, nice tits, and they'd be naked. The important thing is this is explicitly porn. And you would scroll down and then you'd get to the penis and be like, ah, it's a trap. That was the whole idea of traps. That's where the name came from. That's what the meme is. Now, it has come to mean trans women who have not had bottom surgery, but are otherwise very feminine presenting. So, in that situation, if you have a trans woman who is feminine presenting but hasn't had bottom surgery, it's considered a trap because you can get them naked and, oh shit, there's a penis. Completely ignoring the fact that in real life, as I've said before, if a trans woman who hasn't had bottom surgery goes out trolling for strange and doesn't let their partner know before the pants come off, by the way, I'm a trans woman and I haven't had bottom surgery, that is on the trans woman. Not saying they get what's coming to them, because usually, far too often what's coming to them is fucking death, but my point is, this is not something that people encounter regularly. It's an overblown problem to make it seem worse than it is. And Alex, isn't the pronoun problem a small thing and not really relevant for big public discussions? So, pronouns, I think, are a very simple way to show support for gender nonconforming, and I think it's something that needs to be normalized both online and in meat space, in the real world. I think it is relevant for bigger discussions because it is very important to how trans people are perceived. I don't know what the perception is for trans people there where you are, Alex, but depending on where you are in America, in most places, trans people are viewed at best as oddities. Now, there are some small spaces where they are safe, but there's a reason why one of the big discussions in the corona pandemic, the quarantine, was people who didn't feel safe going home. I talked about it a little bit yesterday. People who were finally away from home and able to express themselves and deal with the emotional issues that they'd had, and then they suddenly had to go back home where they couldn't get the support they were used to.
they are men who are crossing over or challenging their gender identity. Well, not really. They're just men who want to be as girly as possible.
Which inherently challenges the gender binary. I've seen a lot of guys who are guys, cisgender men, with their fingernails painted. I think that's great. I don't do it myself because I don't leave the house, so why fucking bother? But I would. I think it looks dope as fuck.
But the trans activists don't necessarily like this. I mean, hell, if you look at this particular picture of the
I have nothing against trans, first of all, but it seems like they're a small minority, so is it proportional to change societal norms for them? So, yes. Because while they are a minority, a lot of our society is built around specifically, not intentionally, but specifically or explicitly excluding them. So I do think that to create a more equal and inclusive society, there are things we can change, relatively minor changes that would benefit them, such as introducing yourself with your pronouns when you meet someone new. Just, hi, my name is Pope Jupiter, he, him pronouns, how you doing? It's something that we already do in certain situations, like, call me Paul. My name's Jason Paul Rogers, call me Paul. Just, instead of Paul, you just normalize adding he, him pronouns. And by doing this, we remove the stigma of using non-standard pronouns, because if everyone has to introduce with their pronouns, then it creates an environment where it's not considered weird to go up and say, hi, my name's Steve, I use she, her pronouns. You know? Or they, them. I mean, usually someone with they, them, or with she, her pronouns wouldn't use the name Steve, but this is, again, something Contra kind of got in a little bit of trouble for. Someone in full-on boy mode using she, her pronouns, which is something that is totally valid and acceptable. Someone who is physically presenting as male, but using, the infamous GameStop T-slur. That is someone who, except for the hair, and I think they were wearing a skirt, is in all other ways presenting as male. I'll be totally honest, when I first saw that years and years and years ago, I thought it was a prank. I thought someone went to GameStop, like, let's see how much trouble we can get them in by insisting it's her. It's ma'am. But it's since come out that is a legitimate trans person, not a drag person, so
trans umbrella, you'll see there's a man pointing out that it's not for anyone else to put down your identity other than yourself, that your identity is what you say and that's it. But it shouldn't really.
We've had this discussion on stream before. A masculine woman is not transgender unless they want to identify as something other than a woman.
Really surprised you that there is actually quite a high number of trans activists out there who think that actually traps are trans women, or just trans women who haven't quite realised that they're trans yet. And so this is
an issue in the trans community of people thinking someone who's even a little bit gender non-conforming is just an egg. Someone who is on the verge of transitioning. And again, we don't want to push identities onto other people. So I think that some trans people could learn to kind of knock that shit off. Not everyone is trans, but there's a difference between individuals saying that about people and that being the default assumption of trans advocates. Because it's not. We tend to take people at their word. If they aren't trans, they aren't trans. I mean, it's as simple as that. Gender identity is less than skin deep.
Start to put pressure on these guys to come out as something that they're actually not. Don't believe me? Well, I've been able to find quite a few tweets that kind of build my point somewhat. To the femboys who plague this world, why don't you just do gender
Femboys are not necessarily traps. Femboys are boys who identify as male, but a little feminine.
Reassignment surgery. The only reason they don't call themselves trans yet is because they're cowardly and transphobic enough to fool themselves into thinking they're just femboy on HRT for the aesthetics. Genuine sick.
Notice there's no context. What is she replying to? This person could be replying to someone who... This could be talking about someone specifically. Also, I love this. This is another Paul Joseph Watson tactic. Taking tweets with like 1 or 2 likes and saying this represents the trans advocacy sphere as a whole. So again, we're to assume this is referring to someone who... Oh, this is talking about Ava I think this might be talking about Ava Unalove, now known as Lumiru, who is trans. They're non-binary. They literally are getting what's called a mastectomy, getting their breasts removed. So even in this situation, they're still talking about a trans person who is undergoing surgery eventually. Obviously, it's postponed at this point.
Sitcom material.
Also, I've seen this avatar on Twitter, and I don't think I've seen a lot of good takes from them. Anyway, even if I'm right, and they're talking about Ava Unalove, which I think she was still going by Ava in early March. And that might even be February because this person doesn't sound American. So even though I don't agree with this person, that's not surprising because again, I've seen this avatar on Twitter and I don't remember their name, but I don't generally agree with them. Also, I think it's telling that the only names they blocked out were probably Ava and their name and left the rest of them there. That's an interesting selective editing.
TBH. Pro tip, if you're questioning your gender for more than a week or two, it probably means you're not cis. Cis people usually don't need to convince themselves they're actually their assigned gender.
Like, I think one of the biggest problems is that these right-wingers think that trans activists and trans people in general, just go around worrying about their gender. And it makes sense that trans people would, because it's very important and has an impact on their life. And I have thought about my gender as it affects my privilege, but like I'm not someone who just agonizes over gender roles or my position in that hierarchy, and I don't know too many other people who do. I mean, I could be wrong. It's not something I talk about with people, but outside of explicitly trans accepting spaces online. So
obviously there's a good portion of femboys who are cis. Nope. Everyone who is a femboy is just an advanced egg. They're trans girls and non-binary people really far.
Again, we don't want to apply labels to anyone else. Now, one of the reasons why this is such a popular thing for trans people to look at someone and say, you're an egg, you're gonna transition someday, is because they see in this person things that they recognize from themselves before they recognized they were trans. So in that way, there is some validity to it, but I do think that some people do tend to push it a little too hard. I agree with this. There's a good portion of femboys who are cis. I suppose there could be some trans male, because femboys identify as male. They identify as men. Generally, from what I understand of femboys, because they're specifically feminine boys. Boys identify as men. So, by definition, they would generally be cis, but there could be a good portion of them who are trans but still identify with some feminine characteristics. Again, that'd be unusual. Generally, trans men, they don't like things that identify with their previous gender because it can trigger their dysphoria, but everyone's different. So, I mean, good portion is doing a lot of work here, but I would generally agree with this. Saying that every femboy is an advanced egg is laughable. This is a bad tweet, but it's 4 likes. It's not the dogma of trans advocacy.
Into denial. If you wear female clothes all day, every day, not hidden, not under male clothes, you have some soul searching to do. You have soul searching to do because if you are living that way, there are laws that protect your right to do so. By those laws on the actual books in real life, you are transgender.
Wait. It's going back to wearing male clothes at all times. So yeah, some trans women actually do what you just said. Again, out of context, you have soul searching to do because if you're living that way, there are laws that protect. No, there is very few laws on the books, in America at least, that truly protect trans people's right to live that way. It's unfortunate. There is some protection in some cases, but keep in mind, again, something else I've talked about on stream, gay panic defense or the trans panic defense is still legal in all of these gray states over here. 36 states. I forgot to count Hawaii. 36 states. So we were making out and her penis flopped out, so I killed her. I killed him, probably what they would say. Well, not guilty by reason of insanity. So yeah, this is another reason why people detransition, is because it's easier to live your life. It's easier to just wear the clothes underneath the gender you were born as and live your life that way to avoid harassment and worse. And again, this is something else I've encountered. People who want to improve the world by force of will and don't know or don't think they can argue or advocate for improvements.
Those laws protect your rights. We fought for them. You're welcome. Obvious egg. I might be trans. Femme boyfriend. No, I'm not trans and neither are you. Me, an enlightened NB. Actually, you're both trans.
Again, this is the last time I'm going to talk about this. This is just trans people calling other gender non-conforming people trans. In individual cases, it could be someone who is, to someone who has gone through it, obvious. Like, someone who has gone through alcoholism can recognize someone who's struggling with it, even if they've never seen them with a drink in their hand. Someone who has gone through depression or other disorders recognizes it in someone else, even if they're always smiling. There are certain things that people recognize in other people. That doesn't mean they're always right. And again, there is a tendency to push this in these trans-inclusive spaces. But that is not the doctrine of trans advocacy.
Not only that, a lot of the femboys will get accused of internalized transphobia. I'll never understand why they just can't accept it.
Internalized transphobia is a real thing and causes harm in other ways. So,
internalized transphobia screaming from the rooftops. And those who really speak out against this and try and stress the fact that no, they are guys, do sometimes end up getting outright removed from social media.
So their handle is Avi the Trap. So there's no reason to believe that this person, who is, again, toxic LGBT community, this is someone who believes that the LGBT community is just toxic and bad. So this person could have gone on a tirade against trans people. Someone with the name Avi the Trap probably is not a good person. So I'm just going to go ahead with all the evidence available to me and assume that they went off using slurs and insulting people and telling people they should KYS, and that's why they were mass reported and banned. So you prevented exactly the same amount of evidence for your position, Rose of Dawn. If you disagree, feel free to talk to me.
Such as this post back in August, mass reporting someone that doesn't want to transition, doesn't see themselves as trans. Again, toxic LGBT community showing they have a shit ton of unnecessary power on this hell site. I never want to see people say that this never happens ever again. Or how about this one? He is angry that trans people bully him for being a feminine man, but trans people should bully him more for being an actual terrible person. Disappointed that people like him aren't the ones being pushed towards suicide.
Okay, so no one should ever be pushed towards suicide no matter what they've done. Period. And in my experience, the trans community is more than willing to call someone out for being a shitty person. Sometimes they're a little too zealous at that. So again, without context, we can't judge the validity of that claim. We just have her word to take for it. And she's already demonstrated that she's lying. So I don't believe you.
So why is this so controversial? I mean, I thought the whole idea behind the trans movement was to accept people as who they are. Somebody who is a femboy or a trap is just a guy who wants to be as feminine as possible, but he's still happy with being a guy. Him being that way, regardless of his reasons for doing so, he might just want to do it for fun. Maybe it's a sexual thing. Who really cares if they're not harming anyone, right? Well, it seems to be that trans activists feel very threatened by their own existence, some of which claim that words like trap are openly transphobic, even though they actually have nothing to.
They were literally originally pictures of trans women who hadn't had bottom surgery used to be homophobically trolling on 4chan. Yes, it's transphobic. Yes, it's a slur. You deciding to redefine it as just guys who like to dress up femininely is literally ahistorical. And I don't know what you mean by... What the fuck did she say?
on, right? Well, it seems to be that trans activists feel very threatened by their own existence.
Threatened by their own What? Let's see.
Some of which claim that words like trap are openly transphobic, even though they actually have nothing to do with trans women. A trap refers to an incredibly feminine guy who looks like a girl. Okay, it's part of a trope of you were tricked into having sex with them, but they are still a guy. They're very different to a trans woman. And on top of that, a lot...
Again. Last time, trap was originally trans women used to queerbait on 4chan. It was literally, haha, you saw a penis, now you're gay. So it's not about cis men dressing up femininely and people thinking they're trans. You're conflating two issues. Stop it.
A lot of traps actually look incredibly feminine and do a much better job at passing than, say, your average trans activist. But I don't...
Wow! Of course they do a better job of passing. They're literally trans women. Holy fuck. Mask off, I guess.
I don't think that it's so much the jealousy there, but more that of control. Trans activists have set up this umbrella as a way of getting everybody into the same space, and when groups like to do that, they like to control the way in which people think. When you have a group that ultimately queers their own definitions of queer, they're not going to stand for it because they're an outlier, and it just so happens to be that a lot of femboys or traps also are quite edgy as well. But what's really interesting is that the femboy movement, so to speak, has taken up the place of more traditional groups like crossdressers. Years ago, crossdressers would have made out that they are not trans women, they are not women, they are just guys who want to dress up as women. I remember a very specific Eddie Izzard skit from years ago where he talked about being out for a drink and there was a guy laughing at him because he was a man dressed as a woman. The guy comes over and asks if he's a man dressed as a woman. Eddie just responds, "Yes, I am." But now, Eddie just says that he is trans. He's accepted his part of the trans umbrella. And that seems to be...
Yeah. A lot of people do drag and think that, oh, that's what I'm feeling. And it's only in the last decade or so that people have realized that society has advanced to the point that, oh no, what I'm feeling is a desire to be a woman, not a desire to just dress like one. Again, you're taking commonalities and things that happen and essentializing them and trying to paint the entire movement with that brush. It's not going to work. You're wrong. You're demonstrably wrong. Drag is not trans, but a lot of people get into drag because they're trans and don't realize it. This is another reason why drag is very supported in the LGBT community, is because it's a good way to introduce people to kind of a soft introduction to transitioning. Plus, it's a way to normalize men wearing makeup.
Happening with a lot of cross-dressers as well. They've effectively given up their own unique identity to join this homogenous movement, and the femboys are the ones who are effectively taking them.
I think this is why there's a lot more camp in... I mean, drag, cross-dressing, whatever you want to call it, has always been very campy. Very sort of tasteless, but gaudy and flamboyant. I mean, when you think of a drag queen, you don't think of someone in a stately evening dress with very tasteful and subtle makeup and a nice, calm... No, you think of someone with big, very nice looking, very well styled, but big and flamboyant and ostentatious hair, and a dress with a million ruffles or tasteful rips and in bright, multi-hued monstrosity. I mean, there's a lot of this flamboyance and camp in the drag community. So it's a great place for artistic expression, in addition to being a safe space to kind of soft transition. But no one is saying anyone who does drag is trans.
Their place. The trouble with all of this is that you're having groups telling people that they are trans when they are not, and especially when they start to put pressure on people to transition when they shouldn't. Alright,
I think she's just gonna repeat herself and I'm done. She's getting me way too worked up for as stupid as she's being. If you question your gender, you're automatically trans? Yeah, I would actually agree with that. This is not a good... I wouldn't say it's the worst piece of advice. I know I questioned my gender for a couple of months under the influence of SJW bullshit, and I'm definitely not trans. Good for you. Thin white axe. Herder, I'm so dangerous and ridiculous. How is it dangerous? Yeah. Turfy bullshit. Hey, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the show. If you liked it, like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment. Thank you. See you next time.